The legend of the Iron Dome, Israel's ultimate pride, has just been officially cremated in shameful flames during a sleepless night in Tel Aviv. When the Tamir launchers spat out their final streams of smoke and then fell silent like soulless steel coffins, the world suddenly awoke to a grim reality. The billion-dollar protective umbrella has been shattered into pieces, no longer just theatrical chases on newspaper headlines. Iran has officially played its trump card, a monstrous hypersonic beast with a mesmerizing flight trajectory that has turned the most advanced Western defense algorithms into worthless scraps of paper. This is not merely an attack. This is an execution of technology and a new kind of military thinking. When the stockpile of interceptors was depleted to the very bottom, Israel's national vital points suddenly revealed themselves as exposed prey lying squarely in the deathly sights of the seven wolves. Tehran did not just launch missiles, they used devastating firepower to break the will to resist and redefine the entire Middle Eastern order with irreversible coordinates. But what is really happening behind those raging flames in the sky when the Iron Dome is now nothing more than a pile of scrap metal waste? What does Tel Aviv have left to bet on for its own survival? How devastating was the power that Iran's superweapon unleashed last night, leaving even the brains at the Pentagon holding their breath in horror? And finally, is this the bitter end for America's influence in the Gulf? In today's special video, Wider Meaning will directly dissect the 7 deadly links in Tehran's campaign to repaint the Middle East. We will expose the reality of the empty ammunition depots of the IDF, decode the weapon that is humiliating the world's most modern radar systems, and predict the Doomsday scenario if Israel crazily plays its final nuclear card. Greetings to our valued viewers following Wider Meaning. Before diving into the commentary, please like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the sharpest analyses of global geopolitical developments. Part 1. Air Defense Out of Ammunition. When the Holy Shield is nothing but an empty frame, war of attrition has always been an invisible meat grinder where numbers on the balance sheet turn into death sentences on the battlefield. And tonight is the truth that Tel Aviv's elite have always tried to cover up from public opinion. The Iron Dome has officially run out of strength. Those million-dollar launchers now stand lonely like broken remnants of shattered glory. Look straight at the bloody reality behind the raging flames in the sky. For decades, Israel has lulled the world with a steel umbrella deified as the unchanging power of the Creator, a seemingly impenetrable screen. But that was when they only had to face Hamas's crude rudimentary arrows. Now they are confronting a tidal wave of firepower calculated by Tehran's algorithms of death. The IDF's fatal mistake lies in the arrogance of someone accustomed to sitting at the top but who has fallen asleep in the glory of the past. They believed Washington's bottomless wallet and Raphael's production lines could pump blood in time for a body convulsing from exhaustion. But Iran, with the mindset of a master in the art of quantity overwhelming quality, has exposed that cowardly truth. Over the past 48 hours, Israel's skies have no longer been a stage for high technology, but a deathly black hole swallowing financial resources. Every Tamir interceptor missile, those glamorous bodyguards worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, rockets up from the launchers only to chase cheap iron flies from the Shahab family. Iran doesn't need a sledgehammer to smash the Iron Dome. They only need a rain of needles to drain every last drop of blood from the defense system. When tens of thousands of simulated targets and swarms of suicide UAVs flood the airspace like a plague of desert locusts, Israel's radar systems fall into a state of devastating electronic trauma. The launchers continuously spit out their final rounds and then fall silent in panic. So when the real Iranian meteor blades come crashing down, the steel umbrella is left as nothing more than a soulless pile of rubble, standing lonely and watching death descend upon the nation's vital points. At strategic sensitive coordinates like Ashkelon or Haifa, the soldiers operating the Iron Dome are tasting the bitter flavor of betrayal from their own exhausted logistics. The launchers still stand tall, the radars still scan frantically, but their bellies are empty. Maintaining a dense fire net has burned through the strategic reserves that Israel took years to painstakingly hoard. Internal sources confirm a bitter reality. Numerous air defense positions in Israel have received orders for forced hibernation. Those million-dollar launchers are now chained by harsh commands, permitted to fire only when enemy firepower aims directly at the heart and lungs of the nation's survival points. This means millions of Israeli civilians have officially been stripped of their protective amulet, pushed into the position of expendable pawns on the chessboard of resource shortage. This is absolutely no longer a story about semiconductors or mythical range parameters. This is the shameful bankruptcy of a military doctrine built on the illusion of infinite supply. Look at the harsh reality. Even if America's production lines rev up to full capacity, they cannot fill the gaping mouth of a battlefield consuming ammunition at the speed of light. When Washington begins scrambling to dismantle Patriot complexes from other strategic pawns to hastily patch up their dying ally, observe how Tehran coldly orchestrates the rhythm of death. They absolutely do not rush to deliver the knockout punch from the very first seconds. Instead, Iran uses its octopus tentacles like Hezbollah and the Houthis to drain the opponent's vitality and suck dry their oxygen. Each barrage of rocket fire from northern Lebanon is not merely a military attack, but a deep wound into the IDF's bleeding bloodstream. When the Zionists realize in shock that they are trapped in a devastating war of attrition, the scythe of the 34th death has already been pressed against their throats. Now, with the Iron Dome launchers standing still like cold cemetery milestones, the positions of hunter and prey have officially reversed in shame. Israel, once accustomed to arrogantly dispensing destruction from above, now cowers, trembles, and calculates every fragile second of survival. This is the highest price of blind military arrogance. A defense system, no matter how sophisticated or expensive, will suddenly become a soulless pile of scrap if those at the helm fail to recognize a fundamental combat truth. In the era of swarm warfare, the so-called Western quality is nothing more than an illusory shell before the powerful rise of quantity and brains with systematic destructive thinking. The depletion of the Iron Dome is absolutely not merely a technical glitch or a temporary shortage. It is the cold, grim gunshot signaling the irreversible collapse of an old order. When the invincible armor is torn apart in shame, Israel's opponents across the geopolitical map have seen through the rotten, weak core inside an entity that only knows how to show off. The extreme panic and the urgent encrypted messages between Tel Aviv and Washington is the strongest proof of the disintegration of an alliance being driven into a corner. People no longer have time to praise how many illusory explosions the Iron Dome is stopping on newspaper pages. Instead, the whole world is counting every gasping breath of the empty-bottomed ammunition depots. The eerie silence of the air defense positions in those life-and-death moments is the most shameful confession of a total defeat. Israel is teetering on the edge of the abyss of annihilation, where salvation from across the ocean is now nothing more than a hazy memory. Meanwhile, Tehran's raging flames are already licking at their heels. Part 2. The superweapon debuts. Redefining the concept of death. If Part 1 is the indictment of a rusty shield's exhaustion, then Part 2 is the funeral march of a divine sword. When Tel Aviv's skies are no longer shielded by Tamir missiles, that is when Tehran decides to pull back the velvet curtain to reveal the mechanical monster it has nurtured in the shadows for decades. Fatah, 2. The conqueror without rival. This is not merely an ordinary ballistic missile. It is a direct, humiliating slap in the face to the entire arrogant military knowledge system of the West. While American generals are still chewing on empty reports about the feasibility of hypersonic weapons on paper, Tehran has turned it into a grim reality. A meteor blade that slashes through space at a speed that turns every early warning radar into blind men watching death descend. Imagine an entity moving at Mach 15, that is, 15 times the speed of sound. At this threshold, the air around the missile is no longer ordinary gas. It turns into a burning plasma layer enveloping Iran's weapon like a natural stealth armor. Every radar wave fired at this plasma layer is swallowed or scattered into nothingness, but the terrifying speed is not the most toxic part. It is the way Fatah, 2 dances and morphs between atmospheric layers that is the most horrifying psychological torture, shattering the dignity and self-respect of the officers controlling the radars or AWACS. Far different from traditional ballistic missiles that fly on a predictable parabolic trajectory like a simple thrown ball, the Fatah, 2 possesses agile maneuvering capabilities, continuously making sudden course changes right in the terminal approach phase. It absolutely does not choose a straight path to attack. It glides across the atmosphere with extreme cunning, twisting and turning like a giant python, mocking and taunting the expensive Western interceptor systems. This is a mathematical nightmare for any of Israel's supercomputers. While Mossad's algorithms are still struggling to calculate the impact point using old logic, the Fatah, 2 has already broken every law of physics on its own, turning defensive efforts into punches into thin air. Each twist of the 34th Python is not only a technological miracle, but also a death sentence for the arrogance of American defense corporations. Israel has been pushed into complete helplessness, forced to watch its skies being torn apart by a hypersonic power they never had in their contingency plans. The appearance of this superweapon has turned America's supercarriers in the Mediterranean, or the most fortified underground bunkers of Mossad, into moving meat targets. Look at what happened at Nevatim Base, home to the proud F-35 stealth Iron Birds. When the Fatah 2 descended, there was not a single alarm bell that rang early enough for the pilots to climb into the cockpits. Its power lies not only in tons of explosives, but in the horrifying kinetic energy of an object moving faster than a bullet. That collision is no different from a small meteor crashing into Earth, piercing through meters-thick reinforced concrete like a needle through paper. The most expensive fifth-generation fighters on the planet suddenly turn into piles of shredded aluminum under the pressure of a new firepower order. The Pentagon was wrong. The Pentagon was wrong. They trusted too much in their monopoly on high technology, only to be slapped across the face by a nation under sanctions for decades. Iran has proven that in this era, the winner is not the one with the most money, but the one who dares to break long-standing game rules with creations of destructive creativity. What sends chills down the spines of military experts is Iran's complete self-sufficiency in this weapon line. This is not imported goods nor crude copying. It carries the blood of modern 34th military science, a science forged in sanctions and hostility. The Fatah 2 is not just a weapon. It is a political message written in fire and blood. It declares to the whole world that the Strait of Hormuz, American bases in the Middle East, and the entire territory of Israel now lie squarely in Tehran's sights. There is no bunker deep enough. There is no shield thick enough to stop the judgment from those who hold hypersonic secrets. The appearance of this weapon has turned all of America's operational plans into scraps of paper. How do you deploy troops when aircraft carriers can be sunk before they even realize the missile is coming? How do you maintain the position of world policeman when your stick is shorter and slower than the opponent's sword? Iran is no longer playing by Washington's rules. They are creating a new set of rules where superpower status belongs to those who possess hypersonic ghosts. Try to imagine the fear enveloping the operations rooms in Tel Aviv right now. Israel's smartest brains and most powerful supercomputers are facing an unsolvable variable. The Fatah 2 is like a firepower black hole, swallowing every hope of a clean and safe war for the Jews. The Iron Dome is breached. And now, Iran's superweapons are leisurely strolling across the skies, choosing targets like a god ruling over life and death. Each time a Fatah 2 leaves its launcher, it is a knife stab through the heart of the Western defense system, leaving scars that will never heal on the global geopolitical map. Israel's arrogance has been nailed to unstoppable flight trajectories. The legend of Western superiority has been burned to ashes by the burning plasma of the Fatah 2. The game has changed, and in this hand, Iran holds the aces, ready to sweep every opponent off the Middle Eastern table. Part 3. Wolfpack Tactics. The art of strangling in a firepower encirclement. If the Fatah 2 inches Part 2 is the death god's blade that slashes through every physical barrier, then the swarm intelligence wolfpack tactic is the invisible noose tightening around Tel Aviv's throat. Iran does not play the gentleman's confrontation game. They are carrying out a coordinated massacre where quantity becomes quality and chaos becomes the sharpest weapon to execute Israel's multi-layered air defense system. This is the collapse of the active defense doctrine. When the opponent does not launch just a few arrows but an entire sky full of iron locusts, every supercomputer at Mossad becomes schizophrenic at the threshold of information overload. Tehran's wolfpack tactic is not simply throwing out a lot of cheap weapons. It is a sophisticated firepower arrangement, a symphony of death orchestrated from command bunkers hundreds of meters underground. Look at how this swarm structure operates. The outermost layer is tens of thousands of Shahed UAVs, trash wolves with engine sounds like saws, tearing apart the night's silence. They fly low, hugging the terrain, slipping through mountain crevices like ghosts, turning themselves into expensive decoys. Their mission is not to destroy targets immediately, but to force the Iron Dome and David's sling launchers to reveal themselves, to spit out rounds, and to drain their own life force. When the $1 million Tamir missiles are busy chasing UAVs worth just a few $1,000s, that is when the wolf pack has completed its mission, draining the blood of the steel shield. This is a humiliation of war thinking. Iran uses crude toys to disgrace the most sophisticated brains of the Western defense industry. They don't need to destroy radars with explosives. They destroy them with a flood of simulated data that causes the interceptor algorithms to freeze because they cannot classify what is a real threat. While the UAV Wolfpack is wreaking havoc in the skies from different geographical directions, Tehran's proxies begin to close the encirclement. This is the art of multi-layered strangulation. Hezbollah from the north pours rocket barrages. The Houthis from the Red Sea launch low-altitude cruise missiles, and militia forces in Iraq and Syria create interlaced firepower corridors. Israel suddenly realizes it is no longer an impregnable fortress but a lonely island in an ocean of fire. The IDF's air defense system, no matter how modern, was only designed to counter linear threats. But when firepower comes from 360 degrees, from every altitude and at every different speed, the Iron Dome becomes nothing more than a blind man flailing among a pack of hungry wolves. The seamless coordination between proxy forces has created a gray zone of firepower, where the boundary between defense and defeat is only a breath apart. When Israel's radars have to stretch to cover thousands of targets at once, that is when the Alpha Wolves, the long-range ballistic missiles of the IRGC, leisurely slip through the gaps to deliver the finishing blows to economic and military vital points. The most toxic point in Iran's Wolfpack tactic is the ability to create maximum firepower pressure in an extremely short unit of time. Imagine 500 targets appearing on the radar screen within 30 seconds. No gun crew, no artificial intelligence can make 100% accurate interception decisions in that context. This overload leads to chain errors, anti-aircraft missiles shooting at each other, or worse, launchers paralyzed because they cannot reload in time. Tehran meticulously calculates every delay second of the opponent's defense system. They turn Israel's skies into a labyrinth of fire, where every step by the IDF leads to an abyss of attrition. This is the dominance of superior thinking. When you master the rhythm of chaos, you are the one directing the game. Israel is forced to fight in a scenario where they are not allowed to win, because even if they shoot down 90% of the UAVs, the remaining 10%, together with ammunition depletion, is more than enough for Iran to claim strategic victory. The appearance of the Wolfpack tactic has officially nailed the coffin of outdated military doctrines. American aircraft carriers, once symbols of absolute power, now tremble at the prospect of being surrounded by thousands of cheap suicide UAVs. In Tel Aviv, the panic lies not only in the explosions but in the terrifying silence of radars burned out by overload. When a defense system is subdued not by brute force but by the intelligence of the swarm, that is when we witness the changing of the guard among predators. The world order is being shaken to its roots by iron wolves bearing the Iranian label. They do not need the sophistication of the F-35. They only need tenacity and a seamless, coordinated strategy. Israel is being strangled in the very cage it painstakingly built, a cage woven from the threads of arrogance and lack of real combat vision. The Wolfpack tactic is the clearest proof that power does not lie in the price of weapons, but in how you control them to create ultimate horror. Tehran has turned the entire Gulf into a chessboard where they hold the white pieces, proactively opening the game and forcing the opponent into checkmate with cheap but powerful expendable pawns. Israel's skies are burning not because of a random fire, but because of a pre-programmed firestorm designed to destroy every last hope of resistance. The Iron Dome is breached, and when the wolves have entered the pen, the prey's end is only a matter of time. Part 4. Israel in a sea of flames. When the deadly coordinates are wiped out, when the Iron Dome shield has been drained to its last round, and the Wolfpack tactic has torn apart every defensive boundary, the most horrifying scenario has materialized. Israel is sinking in a sea of flames. This is no longer scattered explosions on newspaper pages, but a systematic purge aimed directly at the vital arteries of a nation that always considered itself the center of immortality. In the operations rooms of the IRGC, the fingers of Tehran's military elite are no longer pressing buttons to deter, they are pressing buttons to erase. When darkness envelops prosperous cities like Tel Aviv or Haifa, the only light remaining is the raging orange flames from oil depots, military bases, and Mossad intelligence command centers being cremated. Look at the coordinates of Nevatim, once called the Holy Land of the Iron Bird flocks. This is the home of the F-35 Lightning II stealth fighters, billion-dollar symbols of Western air superiority. But in the firestorm of the Fatah, too, stealth is nothing more than a ridiculous concept. Iran's hypersonic missiles do not need to search for F-35s in the sky. They aim straight at the runways and the most fortified HAS aircraft shelters. A collision at Mach 15 generates kinetic pressure so great that it turns meters-thick reinforced concrete into shattered fragments. Nevatim Base now appears in satellite imagery like a giant aircraft graveyard. The fifth-generation fighters that never even got off the runway have been incinerated by temperatures of thousands of degrees Celsius. This is the blow that breaks the fangs and claws of the IDF's air power. With no runways for takeoff and no fuel to load, Israel's sky gods suddenly become useless piles of rusted aluminum amid the sea of flames. But Tehran does not stop at the military. Their target is to break the will to exist of a two-faced nation. Israel's economic lifelines with the world are now nothing more than scorched rubble. Giant container ships are burning fiercely like torches at sea, turning the clear blue water into a black swamp of oil slicks and ash. Power plants, strategic substations, and oil refineries in Ashdod have been beheaded by Iran's scythes. Israel, a nation leading in high technology, is now being pushed back to the Stone Age in an instant. Widespread power outages not only paralyze civilian life but also choke communication systems, turning modern cities into blind oases amid the encirclement of death. The arrogance of the economic brains in Tel Aviv has collapsed upon realizing that no financial algorithm can compensate for this physically devastating destruction. When stock exchanges go dark due to power loss, when skyscrapers shake under the pressure of explosives, that is when the Jews understand the price of provoking a beast that has been cornered. Worse than material losses is the collapse of intelligence confidence. Mossad has always prided itself on knowing every move of the opponent, but they did not know that the coordinates of their own underground command centers had long been in Iran's death list. The precise surgical strikes on command centers in Tel Aviv have turned supposedly impenetrable bunkers into collective crematoriums. When IDF generals have to evacuate in chaos, when the command and control system is severed piece by piece, the Israeli army is left as a giant body convulsing in its death throes. Israel's superior position has vanished like smoke, replaced by extreme panic spreading from the corridors of power to slum neighborhoods. People are no longer discussing how to retaliate, but are searching for the remaining shelters that have not yet been touched by Iranian firepower. Israel in a sea of flames is not just a descriptive image, it is an indictment of the failure of a regional order based on America's fake protection. When the thick black smoke columns from Haifa can be seen from space, it is a message to the whole world that the era of unipolarity has ended. Tehran has used fire to redraw the Middle East map. They have proven that no matter how much money you have or how much backing from the world's #1 superpower, you can still be brought to your knees before an iron will and a merciless destructive strategy. The sea of flames in Israel is a mirror reflecting Washington's helplessness, the one who can only stand by and watch from afar as its closest ally is incinerated by Iranian-labeled fire dragons. Every second that passes, Israel loses another piece of its flesh. The collapse of symbols like Nevatim or Haifa is not just military damage. It is the collapse of a national legend. A proud, solitary, and invincible Israel has died in the greatest fire of the 21st century. What remains is only the ashes of arrogance and the haunting fear of a hazy future where the opponent's firepower is the only one with the right to judge. Israel has sunk in a sea of flames, and in that sea of flames they have not only lost bases, aircraft, or billion-dollar infrastructure, they have lost the soul of a ruler. The Iron Dome is breached, the ground has shaken, and now only the roaring of the flames remains as the sole response to decades of arrogance. The game has lowered its curtain on Israel's cities, and the power of life and death now lies completely in the hands of those standing in the superior position in Tehran. Part 5. The terrifying silence of Washington when the boss starts to let go. While Tel Aviv is blazing and the desperate screams of an air defense system out of ammunition tear through the Middle Eastern skies, at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, a deathly silence is enveloping everything. Washington, which always proclaimed itself the eternal guardian of Israel, is now revealing the nature of a seasoned card player, ready to fold when the cost of pursuit exceeds what it can afford. This is no longer a logistics delay, but a ruthless geopolitical calculation. When American aircraft carriers still stand off the Mediterranean coast watching Iran's Fatah, two fire dragons roasting the IDF's air bases, the world understands that America's superior position is being turned into a sacrificial offering by its closest allies. Look at the harsh truth behind the diplomatic statements. America is not weak, but America is afraid. They fear that an all-out war with Iran would turn their entire network of military bases in the Middle East into mass graves. Washington understands that if they directly intervene to save a dying Israel, the price would not only be trillions of dollars, but the collapse of the entire global financial system based on Gulf oil. The White House's silence in these life and death hours is a tacit message to Tehran. We will not intervene deeply as long as you do not touch America's core interests. Israel, once an irreplaceable outpost, suddenly becomes an outdated pawn, an overloaded burden on the back of old donkey Washington. The ammunition resupply flights that once filled the skies are now thinning out, replaced by soulless phone calls with content about restraint and negotiation. In the IDF's underground command bunkers, the shock does not come from Iran's missiles, but from the coldness of the Big Brother. The Pentagon has begun implementing tactical withdrawal scenarios, relocating personnel and important assets from areas at risk of Iranian retaliation. This is a systematic retreat, an indirect admission that America no longer has the capability or the will to maintain the nuclear umbrella for Israel. This action has severed the final thread of trust. When Israel realizes it is being abandoned amid the sea of flames, panic begins to spread among the political elite. They understand that America's so-called ironclad commitment only lasts as long as it still brings profit. When Iran's firepower proves its ability to destroy the most modern defense structures, America has chosen to preserve its own life rather than die together with an out-of-control ally. Why does America choose silence? Because they are busy compromising in the shadows. Battlefield intelligence reports show that back-channel diplomatic channels between Washington and Tehran are operating at maximum capacity. America is trying to buy safety for its bases by turning a blind eye to Iran punishing Israel. This is the art of sacrificing pawns to save the rook on the big board. America's superior position has been replaced by a shameful attitude of appeasement. They dare not speak out for fear of provoking Iran's hypersonic monster to aim directly at carrier strike groups. Those steel giants, worth tens of billions of dollars, are now nothing more than floating meat targets on the water, completely helpless before the opponent's Mach 15 speed. Washington understands that the era of deterrence by aircraft carriers has ended at the feet of the IRGC soldiers. This terrifying silence is also a sign of deep cracks within America itself. The military elite no longer have any appetite for spilling blood for Tel Aviv's expansionist ambitions when the American economy is teetering on the brink of runaway inflation and the rise of the BRICS bloc threatens the dollar's position. Getting bogged down in a nuclear war in the Middle East is a suicidal act that no sane politician dares to carry out. America is gradually retreating into the shell of isolationism, leaving behind a pile of ruins that they helped build. This is the inevitable end of a relationship based on mutual exploitation. When the Zionists no longer have deterrent value, they become nothing more than a troublemaker that needs to be removed from Washington's equation of interests. The skies are still blazing, ammunition is still running out, and across the ocean, the American boss is still busy calculating numbers to find the safest way to retreat. Washington's silence is not preparation for a thunderous blow, but the echo of an empire in decline, yielding the playing field to those with enough resolve and firepower to establish a new order. The game has changed, and in this hand, the one being abandoned is the one who was once the most arrogant. Israel is having to learn to survive in a sea of flames without the protection of the American shield, a grim reality marking the collapse of a nearly century-old alliance legend. Part 6. The Combat Perspective. The geopolitical map redrawn by hypersonic fire. When the smoke from the IDF's air bases has not yet settled, the world's military elite have had to acknowledge in shock a grim truth. The Middle Eastern geopolitical map they once knew has been cremated. This is no longer an ordinary war of attrition. This is a millennium-scale major surgery where the scalpel is the unstoppable flight trajectories of the Fatah, and Tehran's strangulation tactics. The superior position of the West in the Gulf, built on the muzzles of carrier guns and empty protection promises, is now collapsing like a sandcastle before the fire tidal wave. For half a century, Israel and America have maintained an order based on a monopoly of high technology. They believe that merely possessing F-35 stealth fighters and the most sophisticated radar networks would allow them to sit forever in the position of dispensing order. But the real combat in Tel Aviv and Haifa has delivered a resounding slap to that illusion. Iran has proven a cruel paradox. A nation suffocated by sanctions can still humiliate the richest empires with breakthrough point thinking. When an Iranian missile costing a few $1 million can wipe out a fighter squadron worth billions of dollars right on the ground, every theory about NATO's military superiority becomes scrap. The new geopolitical map is no longer drawn with GDP numbers or flashy political alliances. It is drawn with speed and absolute precision. Whoever controls hypersonic space holds the power of life and death on the Gulf chessboard. Look at the reactions of neighboring countries. The silence of the Arab bloc and the awkwardness of Turkey are not coincidental. They are witnessing the collapse of a guardian god. When America cannot even protect its beloved child Israel from Iran's blows, faith in Washington's security umbrella has turned to smoke, and power is shifting in a cruel way. Tehran is no longer an isolated nation. They have become the firepower arbiter of the entire region. Every decision on energy security, every maritime route through the Strait of Hormuz must now be examined through the lens of the IRGC. The geopolitical map no longer has safe zones for Western interests. Instead, it is a dense network of deadly coordinates that Iran can activate at any time. Tehran's superior position is established not by grand declarations but by the terrifying silence of American Aegis systems when facing Iranian firepower. This is the imposition of a new order where real combat power crushes all political fame. Diplomats in Geneva or New York are still busy discussing paper peace solutions, but reality on the battlefield has advanced decades ahead of them. Israel is facing an unprecedented crisis. When its military deterrence capability is stripped away, Tel Aviv's position at the negotiating table is reduced to a big fat zero. Iran has used missiles to conduct a referendum by blood and steel. They have proven that Israel is no longer an impregnable Western outpost, but a vulnerable entity trembling under the shadow of hypersonic destruction. The new geopolitical map will have no room for the arrogance of Jewish Zionism if they do not accept one reality. Regional control has changed hands. This map change has shockwaves far beyond the Middle East borders. It sends a steel message from other hotspots around the world, from the Taiwan Strait to the fields of Eastern Europe. If America cannot save Israel, its bloodiest ally, then who can believe their commitments? The world is witnessing the rise of a true multipolar order, where nations with iron will and breakthrough firepower technology can challenge the dominance of the old superpowers. Iran has redrawn the map not only with new borders, but with a firepower boundary that cannot be crossed. Any effort to restore Washington's old order will have to face the price of total destruction of the stationed forces. Israel and America have lost control of the chessboard. The new geopolitical map is one of ruthless pragmatism, where firepower is the only language respected. The smoke columns rising from Israel's cities are the final strokes completing the picture of a Middle East without the shadow of Western imposition. Tehran has stepped into the superior position not by anyone's grant but by its own strength and combat acumen. The game has lowered its curtain for those who fell asleep on victory, and a new chapter full of firestorms but also raw truths is opening for all humanity. Part 7. The final turning point. The Doomsday scenario and the nuclear card. When the last defensive walls collapse and Israel's pride is crushed under the boot of Tehran's firepower, the world is holding its breath at the threshold of a horrifying choice, the Samson option. This is no longer military theory on paper. This is the moment when the cornered beast is ready to pull down the entire temple to die with its enemies. Israel's superior position has always relied on a ghost, never officially acknowledged but feared by all: the nuclear arsenal in the Negev desert. Look at Tel Aviv's psychological warfare right now. When the F-35 bases turn to smoke, when the American fleet silently retreats, and when Iran's hypersonic missile rains turn Israel into a fiery island, the Jewish elite will face the existential question: accept annihilation or drag the entire Middle East down to hell. The Doomsday scenario is not an exaggeration in the darkness of the underground bunkers at Dimona. The nuclear activation and firepower procedures have begun to stir. Israel understands that if it cannot exist as a great power, it will not let anyone else inherit this land. This is the madness of a dying empire, a final effort to reverse the board by threatening to wipe Tehran, Isfahan, and the entire resistance axis off the world map. But stay sober to recognize a combat reality. Iran is not an amateur. They have calculated this scenario from 3 decades ago. Iran's construction of missile cities, hundreds of meters deep under mountain rock, is not only to avoid conventional bombs, but to survive and retaliate after a nuclear attack. The world is standing on a tightrope. Just one wrong decision, one hothead in Tel Aviv pressing the button, and the Middle East map will turn into a radioactive black hole. But combat reality shows that even nuclear weapons cannot save a regime that is rotten in will and depleted in resources. The legend of an invincible Iron Dome has turned to dust amid the fires in Tel Aviv. An era of Western arrogance has officially been cremated by hypersonic plasma streams from the East. The Great War between America, Israel, and Iran has permanently changed the way we view modern warfare. Never believe in gilded protective umbrellas when the opponent possesses death scythes traveling at Mach 15. Thank you for accompanying wider meaning in this shocking analysis. We will continue to closely follow the hottest burning coordinates to bring you the rawest truths and the superior perspectives that no mainstream media channel dares to touch.